Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and for today's episode, we cover how to go from ideas to actual applications, where to start, which ideas to pick, and all the work involved to a point where you have a full-fledged mobile game, for example. My guest, Rosemary Lokhorst, is the CEO and founder of Storybyte Studio, where they do all of that and more. I'll put all her socials in the description below. Check her out, and with that being said, enjoy the episode.
Beyond coding.
How's the tech space in Switzerland? Because I have no clue, actually.
Pretty good. I mean, the penetration of technology in Switzerland is pretty high, and that's why there's a bunch of tech companies here because the customers here actually use a lot of technology,
Yeah.
and also we have a couple of really really large international companies like Novartis, Hoffmann La Roche, UBS, and Credit Suisse, and so they account for a lot of the tech market, and that means that there's also a lot of people delivering tech to them here.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Plus, Swiss people do like to innovate a little bit, even though that's not really what they're known for worldwide, but they like doing that. And so, for example, where I live in Zug, there's a bunch of blockchain companies and crypto companies that have sort of settled here, and they call this. They like to call themselves Crypto Valley around here.
Yeah.
Which is they get incentives and tax incentives and stuff like that. So there's over 200 small companies that are in that space of crypto, blockchain, metaverse stuff here, just in this small little town that I live in.
Wow, that's incredible. When a company really wants to innovate, I mean, they come to you pretty often as well. How do they find you? How do they get to your doorstep? Is it a lot of networking?
Some of it is. I mean, usually it's word of mouth of other people that refer me from projects that I've done. So I've been really lucky in the last 3-4 years. I've only gotten projects through referrals,
Wow.
which is why I don't really have very up to date websites or anything like that, because I'm usually we're very small, right? We're pretty booked out for quite a while. So we usually have like only one larger project that we do, and then at the same time, the other projects we do is just smaller things. So we would take on, like, let's say, one startup where we really help them with their technology and their idea of what they want to do overall, where we help them with the production of the software or the applications that we want to do. And then we take on in parallel a couple of smaller projects, like maybe helping the people with the storyline or only with the concept of what they want to do, or with certain workshops or doing some quality assurance, but really just like punctual consulting where we're good at, and then one larger project. So that way, it really is, it's nice. We get to see still a lot of stuff that's going on, and a lot of different new ventures.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have some security with one of our bigger projects. So the current one we're on probably runs through to at least end of next year.
Yeah.
And then, apart from that, I just take on stuff that I find is it's just interesting, and that our team can bite its teeth into.
That's really cool. Can you give an example of one of the kind of longer projects that have been running, or that maybe
Yeah, sure.
already
So
ended?
we've a larger one that we did in the last couple of years was an application or game called Shadow's Edge,
Mm.
and it was a serious game, meaning that the game had a purpose beyond just entertainment.
Yeah.
And so that was a mental health game where we took contents from a book that an author had written, and then we digitized those and turned that into an actual game of a city that's been hit by a storm, just like when something bad has happened in your life. And with different types of psychological influences and exercises in the game, we then helped players realize what was happening to them, help them build tools for resilience to be able to understand what they're going through and how they're doing things, and to be able to then to handle those, basically. And so in the game you had artistic expression exercises, cognitive behavioral therapy exercises, as well as also expression through journaling and through prompted journal questions, if you will.
Yeah. That's a lot. Did the client, so I'm assuming a client has an idea before they come to you to kind of execute it. Did they already have this in mind, or did
Sometimes.
it kind of grow organically in that way?
Yeah, this one grew kind of organically. I mean, the ask was, can you help us digitize the book that we have? And
Yeah.
we have our general audience is kids, because they had
Mm.
a really cool book that used prompted journaling questions to help kids understand what they were going through when they're dealing with a chronic illness. and they wanted to reach an audience that was more in the teen young adult space. And so therefore we then looked at, what are the options? Can we use like audiobooks or Kindle books or things like that, or do we want to really make it more interactive? And as soon as we knew we wanted to make it interactive, then we popped up with the idea of, well, why don't you try and make a game of it, because that's where the kids are. Let's see if we can get the psychological content to a medium that they like doing, that provides some stickiness and that helps them adhere to a longer term program. And so that's why we came up with the game. So it was kind of a team effort.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then, I mean, creating a game is very specialized work, I would assume. I've never done it, and I built a lot of software, but never in a game sense. Is that also
Mhm.
what you specialize in, or like what your team specialized in?
Yeah, so with my team, what we do is we look at what is around, and
Mm,
we try to help the customer figure out what is the best medium that they could use.
yeah,
Sometimes that is a gamified application. Sometimes we take mechanisms from gaming or storytelling parts from gaming and just build it into an application. Sometimes it's really a game, a full-on game. So at the moment, for example, I'm consulting on a weight loss application
yeah,
where we use gamified elements to help people understand why they're not losing weight and help them really understand how weight loss happens, and also then give them exercises. So one of the things about weight loss, for example, is that a lot of that happens in your brain, and it happens already before you even know it happens.
mm,
And what you can do is you can help retrain your brain. And we use AR exercises, augmented reality exercises, to help people, let's say, desensitize against food, right? It's the same methods that are used for addiction, because eating is also some kind of addiction.
yeah,
And so therefore that kind of mechanism from gaming to really use these technologies and to build up different levels, basically, right? To make it from easy going to through learning, to make it more interesting and more challenging. That's all mechanisms that we use from gaming. But it is a proper application with psychological content, verified by doctors. We're doing clinical trials, and there, basically what my company does is really advises on how structurally how we could build this up, how you can create the levels, the content, making the content from taking it from a psychological perspective and making it more user friendly, if you will, to
yeah.
make it simpler for people to understand, and really divide them up into small design loops so that you can have a little bit of a feeling of having achieved something in smaller steps before you then take the next step. And those are mechanisms from gaming that we bring in, but we don't develop the game
Mm.
or the application. There's a different company that does that. We just advise on, the methods, inputs from gaming and inputs from storytelling that you can do. And that's what I mean with, the smaller projects that we take on the side. Whereas with Shadow's Edge, for example, we did all of it, right? The whole production. We were the ones that hired the development studio, oversaw the development,
Yeah.
also did the whole project management, bringing the game to market, doing all the interviews and the PR for it and marketing for it, etc.
That's incredible. Because just for my idea and also for the audience's idea, when it comes to your team, how many people are we talking about? Kind of within the
Yeah,
scale of
so
operation?
it scales up and it scales down. So
Yeah.
fixed, we only have 3 people,
Okay.
but I have about 20 freelancers that I work with
Yeah.
on a regular basis, and that come in depending on expertise. And what you have to think about there is, if you go into a project like this, a lot of times companies don't know how big the project is going to get
Mm.
until they understand what their needs are and what they want to do, right? And so they don't want a full-on team yet with everything going on. So what we do is basically we have this sort of a set mechanism of doing a workshop that gets them through this idea finding into like a base concept. And those base concepts, usually we have like 2 or 3 varieties. That's a workshop that takes about 2 to 3 days with the client, and
Mm.
then about 2 weeks work to prepare the concept ideas so that they can visualize it, so that they know what kind of a budget is there, etc. That's what my core team and I, that's what we start on and what we do. And then within that, we pull in people from, let's say, development. So we have people that really know how to code. very well. We have front end coders, back end coders. We know people in AR and VR that we pull in, for very specific advice, for example. I also work with psychologists and user research people so that we understand what we're trying to achieve and that we know how to set up the measurements, because it's one thing to build a game for mental health, but how do you measure that, right? How do you know that the game is successful?
Yeah,
And you have to think of that before you actually build the game. You can't just build it and then afterwards say, "Now let's look if this works,"
exactly.
right? Especially since a lot of times these larger projects have a big budget.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I think the reason why clients come to me is because they don't have to lock into a full project at the beginning.
Mm.
We can do this kind of concept work with, getting various specialists in for very short periods of time to really nail things down. And then from there, sometimes they do things in-house. Like I did a concept for a beverage company that had the issue in Latin America, that they had these kiosks and mom and pop shops, these little cafes come up with young people starting their own little company.
Yeah.
And of course, they had no education or anything, so they didn't really know how to handle those. And then they basically go bankrupt within a couple of months.
Yeah.
Now, that's not good for the people, obviously, but it's also not good for the beverage company because they lose inventory. They have a new customer they have to, go after again and again and again and again. And so we came up with this sort of SimCity-like game, but really for a small kiosk and a small business to simulate how they would run inventory, how, to simulate managing their money, for example, and how they would get customers in. And if they played that game and leveled up, they would get real life benefits from the beverage company, like discounts on drinks, free merchandise, for example, free furniture bits, those kind of things, just to help them get through. So this is again a serious game. The idea is to help people get a little bit of an education around being an entrepreneur and what they're doing, but it also brings benefits to the company because their losses went down in having to come up with new customers every 2 to 3 months, basically. And so there we only help with the concept, and then they decided to build the thing in-house. And we just periodically, are on the steering committee to check how progress is going.
Yeah, I think that flexibility is worth a lot for, customers or clients, whatever you want to call them, right? If they want to do it in-house and they have the capabilities to do so, they can. And otherwise, scaling up with people that you trust, people within your network, probably people you've worked with before, is a huge benefit. Because when it actually has to ramp up, when you know a lot of things need to get done and you just need to do it, that's when you actually need people that do that work. And before that, it's a lot of ideation. And that has to do with, talking with the stakeholders, also knowing probably what technically is possible and what is not possible, and be able to challenge the ideas. But when you want to ramp up, the option to do so, I think is very valuable. My question there is, it takes a lot of trust, right? To work with a lot of freelancers, people that you trust, people that you've worked with before. But before you can work with people that you've worked with before, there's always that first time in building up that trust or having that first dialogue, getting to know each other. How did you get your network to a point where you confidently can say, we can ramp up whenever we need to, because I have a network of people that I trust and that can get this done?
Yeah, I think that's just happening over time. That's not something you can rush into. You have to have done a few projects with people, for some of the games we did RFPs, and we really reached out and saw what those people can do, and we looked at what they've done in other customer projects and reached out to those customer projects. But a lot of it is really again word of mouth, right? If I work with some freelancers and they want to pull somebody in, then I know that that's somebody they trust, otherwise they wouldn't bring them into the project. And so therefore a lot of the network that we have comes through working with people who then again work with people, etc. And that's just something you build up over time. The idea to do this was not really born as a business concept saying, okay, I want to, only work with freelancers from now on. But it was actually really more personally for me, because I'd been in startups and I'd actually just, given 18 hours a day to those startups. And I was quite tired. And I said, look, I want to downsize a little bit. And so I wanted to take some time off and really kind of feed the creative side again, the creative passion, and therefore I scaled down basically, right?
Mm.
And luckily I was able to put some of the team that I had into other projects, which was great, right? And then some of the team I knew I wanted to get back or retain, and basically hired them out for certain projects for a limited time. And then I noticed, well, while I was taking some time off on myself, I actually kept being involved in some concepts and some concept work and some ideation, as you say. And I started seeing that that's actually something that people need. And
Mm.
I don't really, after 30 years in this kind of business, I don't really feel the need to build up a huge company anymore. I just want to do work that's fun, right?
Yeah.
People always ask, well, are you successful, and what is success for you? Well, success for me is having to wake up, being able to wake up every morning, do something that you think is really fun, and being able to make a good living off it. Right now, does that mean I need to have 100 employees or 200 or 500? Because that's, for me, more of a status symbol than actually doing a good job. And I really love being able to be involved in all these kinds of different projects and learning something new every single time.
Yeah.
And that's why, this balance works for us to bring a little bit of security, because if you have employees, they want some security too. So bring a little bit of security with longer term projects. Right now, for example, I'm working on an esports company where I'm getting into the company also on an investment level, if you will. And we're doing some activations in the esports industry. And that's a very early startup, but it's a longer term. There's we're going to look for larger investment and really build that company up. So I'm staying involved with that, and that gives us a little bit of long-term leeway for the people in my team, and it allows me to do applications on the side that are just really interesting and helpful also for serious gaming, such as the weight loss app or simulation applications in smart city areas, for example.
Yeah. I love that. I love that it can
It's a
be
balance.
exactly, but it doesn't have to be complex, right? A lot of people make whatever success means, make it very complex. But it can be, smaller kind of can give it this justice, I guess. I wouldn't call it smaller in a negative sense, but it can be simpler, right? It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
complex. If you wake up and you love what you're doing and you can make a good living off of it, then why can't that be enough, right? That should be enough. It doesn't have
Yeah,
to be. It depends on
exactly.
yourself, obviously. But if that's enough,
Yeah.
that's really great. So I love
Yeah,
that.
everybody has a different meaning of success, I think, for them. And for me, it's really being able to, if I feel like the weather is nice and I live 20 minutes from the mountains and I want to take an afternoon off,
Oh
I
yeah.
can, right? Because I know that everything is sorted, and I have a great team behind me, and I can do those kind of things. And I offer that also to the people that work with me. We always take care of each other. We always make sure that if we need to do something privately, we always make sure that that's possible. And we always make sure that everybody is happy with the work that we're jointly doing. And
Yep.
that's just, for me, a lot more fun. I get up now and it's every day is just really a fun day, and we figure out what we can do and we figure out what's possible with technology. That's awesome to be able to say that and to be able to experiment with that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. One of the questions I still had was, when a client comes to you and they have a certain problem or they have a certain domain, I'm assuming you don't really are specialized in that domain yet, but you feel confident enough to take ownership of that, right? Whether it's the psychological aspect and the empathy of the game that you mentioned before, or it's kind of the esports kind of venture you're going into now. Those are very opposites in domain. And sure, they might have gamified elements which kind of align there. But still, you have to be confident enough to say, okay, we can do this. How do you get that confidence up there to where you can say, okay, we can do this? And when a client comes to you, maybe you can also say, we can't really do this. How do you build that up?
Yeah, and sometimes we do say we can't do this, or
Yeah.
we say, this is possible. However, we might need a partner for that because we don't do that. Or
Yeah.
we sometimes even say, well, probably it's not even possible. And we have to actually figure out, is it possible? Which I
Yeah.
have one of those cases at the moment that I'm working on. We're just trying to see, is it even really possible what they want to do yet, right? At some point, everything will be possible anyways, because it's
Mm.
technology. But yeah, absolutely. the first thing that I do when a customer comes to me with a problem or with a fun challenge that they want to do is I just listen to them and I tell them, okay, that's your domain. You know exactly what works there. Here's the ideas of what we can add to it and how we could add to that. So as an example, we have a music customer that we're working with now to see how can we turn their meet and greets with musicians into the metaverse, into a fun environment, and attach like gaming areas with it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of esports adjacent because there's same mechanisms in there. But I'm not, I don't know music except from consuming it, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore we need their specialists. But the part I think that's really sometimes difficult for people who are more on the coding side is to translate other people's business into what is possible from a technology perspective. And I think that's why we're really good. And that's why customers come to us, because we don't say we know everything, every single thing, like the psychology of weight loss. I didn't know anything before I started with this application, right? But the doctor that wants to make that application, he's been doing that field, and he's been working in that field for 35 years. So he knows how to do this. So then it's a matter of taking his content and translating that into different smaller stories and helping him kind of make it into chunks that are understandable. And from those chunks, then also helping him see what technologically is possible. And then we have the discussion, like, for example, one of the exercises that will go in there is about food and restraint, being able to handle, having food put in front of you and say no to it, or stop after a couple of bites. That's a very tricky thing for somebody to do. Just like, if you put a pack of smokes in front of somebody and then tell them, well, you don't have to take it. I mean, it's not really, it's not really an option for them,
exactly.
Right? Let's be honest. Yeah. And so, then we looked at, okay, how can we do that? Would AR help? Because you're putting them exactly into that situation where they are. You can put them into their own living room with the foods they like, right?
Yeah.
Except in the first step, it's not real. So it's a little bit easier to resist, right? But you can train, you can see what can be done and things like that. And so helping them understand, helping a doctor understand, what the potential of it is. Usually I find that expertise of what can actually really be done with it, that comes from the business themselves. We just need to be able to really tickle that out of them, ask them the right questions. And usually the businesses don't know where to start in asking those questions, right? What do they really want to achieve? Where is the pain point really of their customer, and why do they want to do this? So that, I think, is I think that's the little, the unfair advantage, if you will. We've been in so many different types of projects that we know the questions to ask to understand the project.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, finding out what is actually going to be valuable down the long run, or how this is going to be in a practical sense, it takes a lot of good listening and asking the right questions before you can get that from the stakeholder side, right? And then you still have kind of these chunks of works, and they might be digestible, but they're still assumptions, right? Do you then test them with users, or do you implement them and then give them to the users as fast as possible? Or what is then the next step there?
Absolutely. Getting feedback that starts from day one. I mean, it starts from just even, if we had a conversation, I then go back to my network and say, okay, does anybody have, or if I already know, obviously, that I know who to ask. But even if I don't know who to ask, I go back to my network and say, look, here's a case. Does anybody have expertise in this area? Can they give us a second opinion? And then once we create the concept with the customer, we already then ask test users as well after the concept, like which of these concepts will work for you? What are the things that work and don't work? And then we have a list of questions depending on what we want to know about the outcome. There's different types of questions. As an example, for Shadow's Edge, for the mental health game, we did an impact study that lasted 6 weeks when we had the first proof of concept. And even before that, we already had people look at the drawings, at the concept, at everything. But then we did like a proper design study after the first proof of concept, after version 1, if you will, where we looked at 6 weeks. We did a baseline study and an end study where we asked them how playing the game made them feel. We looked with the university, we developed with the university and with the Dutch government for health, for
Yeah.
digital health. We developed a questionnaire that looked at what makes a person more resilient,
Mm.
and how do you ask the right questions. And then we turned that into a baseline study that we asked before they started playing the game. We asked them to play the game for 6 weeks, 20 minutes 3 times a week, and then we did the study again. At the end, we asked them to fill in the survey again. We also did interviews with psychologists in the meantime, and we asked them to create what we call the player diary. So really, after a session of play, just write down, how did playing make you feel,
Yeah.
basically, like a little journal. And that's pretty early on in the project already. So that's after a few months already, right? And then ideally, the way that you develop things is to take shorter chunks, make something small, and then slowly but surely turn it into a bigger project over time, while each step is being tested, so that you can really get to the errors, if you will, very early on.
Yeah, I can imagine that. If it comes to, so there's a lot of ideas packed in there, and some actually made it into the game as well. But it starts with ideas, right? Even the part of journaling and creating that empathy. I mean, it probably has some psychological theory behind it, why that is effective. But which ideas get picked up and which get actually implemented? Because I'm assuming it starts with a lot of ideas. Then you pick a few, and I don't know based on which requirements, maybe like a foundation within the theory behind it, but then you actually implement them and you test them. How do you go
Yeah,
from
I
that
mean,
ideation step to actually?
that's a good question.
Yeah.
Everything comes back, I think, from the what we call the design question. So,
Okay.
what do we want to achieve with the product? And that's, in that case, was, how do we build a product that will help people mentally improve, or improve how they deal with their mental health, basically,
Mm.
right? How they build resilience, and everything goes back to that. And so we looked up with our psychologists. We checked what are the things that help with resilience. One of them is narrative therapy, for example, right? So that's where the journaling idea came from. One of them is artistic expression, which is where art comes from, because it uses different sides of the brain, different inputs, plus also art can be a way to vent, right?
Yeah.
And then with those two combined, we looked at, okay, well, how can we then combine that into something that makes sense? And so the idea was born to create a world, a city called Shadow's Edge, where in the city you can paint and you can write. So you have to
Mm.
find the pages of a missing journal and answer the questions that are on them. That's the prompted journaling. And those questions would be about sort of the stage of of grieving, or of reworking your issues that you're in. So the game's levels actually follow a psychological process that happens when something bad happens in your life. And each of those levels has different types of questions associated with it that you would also get in therapy. And so we used those and reformulated them to fit into the world, but with that same kind of content. Like, for example, it will ask you, one of my favorite questions is, have you ever thought that you're wearing a mask and people only see that mask, they don't see the real you?
Okay.
What's that like? How does that make you feel? What does the mask look like? And what's the difference between the mask and the real you, for example, right? So there's follow-up questions that we can ask. That's one of the prompted questions that we have in there that people journal about. And the artistic expression can be great to vent. And because it was a city, we then use graffiti as the artistic method of expression, because it doesn't have to be pretty. People don't have to know how to paint beautiful murals. They can just add text. They can add, anything, because it doesn't matter, right? It still looks cool. And so that's how you kind of narrow these ideas down. You take the big conceptual things that work in the application for weight loss. It's a tested and proven method that this particular doctor has used over the last 30 years. And then we see, how can we visualize that? How can we really make sure that people can internalize it and make it playful enough that it turns into practicing this method
Yeah.
over time? And that's, I think, where gaming can help as well.
That's really cool. I mean, you mentioned this kind of design question, which is, this is my assumption, but is it kind of the emphasis of what your problem statement is, or
Pretty much,
pretty
yeah.
much,
It's
right?
it's yeah. It's pretty much, you take the problem and then you say, okay, how would I? What is the perfect? What is the perfect outcome if I were to solve this problem? What do I
Okay.
want? What I want to happen afterwards, right? We want We want, for example, let's take the esports world. We want people to have a more interactive experience when they go watch esports
Yeah.
and feel more connected to that esports event afterwards, even when they leave, have more of a community around it and a family around it, if you will,
Yeah.
so that it becomes less a spectators thing, but more of an interactive event for them that lasts longer. So the design question is then, how do we make that status happen, right? What can we design to create a situation and an event that people will want to belong to, want to keep alive for longer, and can feel that they are actively participating in?
Yeah.
That would be your design question.
That's really cool because I think, I mean, from talking to a lot of people, when you really have a dedicated team, is also when your purpose is really crystal clear, right? This is our team.
Yeah.
We aim to solve this, or we work to contribute towards this. And when you have that, you kind of have that step on the horizon, and any kind of question or any ideas you can challenge with that step of the horizon, right? With the example of
Correct.
esports, right? Gaining a better sense of connectivity and interaction. Whatever you implement needs to contribute towards that goal. If it doesn't, yeah, then it's not really discussable in this sense. So then the things that actually contribute to those are the things you work on.
Correct.
Yeah, I
Those are the
think that's really
ideas that
cool.
automatically, the other ideas automatically filter out, right? If it doesn't meet the criteria of interactive. And we also had the word positive in there somewhere, because we wanted a positive community, like a sense of belonging.
Yeah,
And so anything that doesn't serve that then has to go, right?
yeah, yeah, that's really cool. Earlier you mentioned there's kind of three phases a client project might fit into, right? Things you can do, things you've done, which are two, and things that have never been done before, which means you're really, really trailblazing that way as well. And I mean,
Yeah.
from talking to you earlier, I know you do projects like that as well. And it's really, I mean, from a business sense, you need to know what's possible, but then from a technological perspective, you don't know what's been established yet. So how do you bring those two then together? Because when a technology is established, you know what's possible and what's not. But when you're trailblazing, it's kind of a whole different story there.
Yeah, it is. And again, that takes a lot of trust.
Mm.
You have to find the customer that's willing to try something out, and that understands that they're not coming to you because you know everything, because if it's trailblazing, you don't, right? But
Yeah,
they have to understand that you are somebody that can guide them and that can help them make decisions on that trail that you're blazing, and that has your best interest at heart. And so there it becomes much more about the relationship and seeing how far you want to go. You have to also be very clear then in setting boundaries and say, okay, here's what we're willing to experiment on, here's what we're not. And so ideally those kind of trailblazing projects would have a baseline of things that we can do so that it could still be successful.
mm.
And then you have like sort of yeah these how can you call them, these outliers, if you will,
Yeah,
that could be the ones that are making things spectacular versus just good. And so therefore it has to again be a little bit of a balance so that the client can still get a good solid project from it. And then there are certain things that we say, okay, look, that's what we aim for. And again, this is why certain processes actually help, because if you start with the prototype and then already start testing things, you can see, does it even make sense? For example, that's number one, right?
yeah,
But then also technologically, you start seeing, okay, where are the issues? What are the things we can do? What are the things that we just can't solve, right? Um, Let's take an example from Shadow's Edge again. One of the things at the beginning that we knew was going to be a little bit tricky was creating graffiti on a mobile phone in a game,
yeah,
and really also make that meaningful. And so those are the things that you have to then really be careful for. What we wanted to trailblaze also was to be able for people to share things, their art, with other people, so they felt in a community that they're not alone.
yeah,
So in the game, you have something called Shadowgram, which is kind of like an Instagram. But we also knew that just from an organization perspective, technologically, there's a lot more that's possible than what we did. But from an organizational perspective, we had to be careful, because depending on what you can share, that also means you have to monitor it. It
yeah,
has to, you have to have processes in place for like suicide prevention and things like that. And so we just had to make sure that we limit some of the things that are technologically possible to make sure that the environment and the project still really remain that baseline, remain something that is really positive for the community and for the users. So it's not always about technology. Sometimes yes, the technology is new and we don't know what we can do with it.
Yeah.
I love those kind of things because it's fun to experiment with, right? But you have to find the right customer that's willing to try that out. And a lot of times that takes money. So it's not always easy.
Yeah.
But also you have to really keep in mind that if you are trailblazing, are you just doing it to show something cool, or are you doing it because that which is cool is actually trying to solve something?
Yeah. I can imagine it can be quite challenging when there's a really cool idea, but it doesn't actually deliver that value that you think it will, or it's kind of opposed to kind of the goal or the mission that you're going for. And being like, okay, we know this is really cool. We know we can do a lot of things with this, but it's either
Yeah.
going to be, we're going to put a pin on this and we're going to do it later, or we can't do it because of these reasons, right? If it doesn't make sense, don't do it, even though it's a really cool idea. I think you can actually lose yourself and just focus on really neat ideas and cool ideas, but then you won't be as effective as when you focus on what you actually want to achieve.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah.
And there's no easy solution for that, right? We'll still, we also still do stuff where we then think, well, it was really cool, but it's just, it's part of doing business. You make mistakes. Hopefully you make mistakes quick. They always say fail fast, fail often, right?
Yeah.
And we learn from those, and it gives us a little bit more expertise for the next time. And that also does mean that I, as an entrepreneur, take risks because I can't always have the customer stick up for things we want to try out. So I take risks too with that. But as long as I can afford to do that, it can still be a lot of fun too.
Yeah. How difficult is it from your position to say no to clients in either ideas they have or wishes they have, and be like, oh, either we can't do this, or this is not possible, or I don't think we should do it because of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, it's very difficult,
Yeah, right.
especially because I really, some of the ideas that come up, I love those ideas and I really want to do them.
Yeah.
I think we just had this case just like a week or so ago, where a new customer is coming to us with a project that would be just so amazing, but I know technologically it's just not really going to turn out the way that they expect, because
Okay.
what they expect is not really possible yet. And so now it's about, what can we do? So in that first meeting, we had to have a conversation with them and say, well, here's what's possible. Here's what we think is possible. Here's what could be possible, but there's no guarantee, right?
Yeah.
We can try, but there's no guarantee. And that's just something we have to work through and see what we can do. That happens regularly. There's several customers where that happens with. Oftentimes we then settle on, as we said before, we take like sort of what's a good solid base that has like a nice stretch goal that works. And then, can we set aside like some kind of a risk budget to see if that other thing is possible and if we can do it. And then over time, we figure out because the other thing is also, does the audience want that, right? Is the customer's customer, is that the person they're doing this for, is that wanted, needed, if you will.
Exactly. That's the end user in that sense. But I like that you mentioned, right? You don't just say no and that's final. You give the customer, in this case, the kind of project holder, I guess, you give them options. You say, well, these are some of the options, and we're gonna figure out which option we like the most, or which few of the options we like the most, and we're gonna pick and choose. Yeah. And either we're gonna deviate from them and pick another option, but at least you get to choose, right? Because the worst thing you have is to have one option, because then you have to do that one. Choosing allows people to think about whatever options they have and then pick accordingly.
And sometimes that means referring them to somebody else, because we just really can't do it, but we can at least help them still then figure out, who is the best to refer it to, who has done this, or who is doing it, or who could do it, basically, and then referring them. And sometimes that does mean that there's no business in it for me, but it also means that, again, as we said really early on, that there's a network that I'm building up of knowing who can do which parts. And building that collective network to be able to involve the right people in projects.
Yeah, really cool. I really enjoyed this conversation, Rosemary. I'm going to round it off here. Is there anything you'd still like to share with our audience?
I think maybe just one thing, I know I'm kind of an odd one out because I'm not trying to build a huge business. I'm consciously, very consciously staying small. So I maybe just want to say, success is what you make it to be, what you think works for you. And that's something to figure out and really go after. I can honestly say that, I'm happier now that I'm doing small stuff than I've ever been when I was doing large, super large projects. And so, therefore, it just depends on what people want to do, right? What do you want to wake up doing? Because if you're an entrepreneur, odds are that you're going to spend 10 to 12 hours a day doing it. So you may as well do something that's really fun.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the only way you can realize that is with time and experience, right? Your experience in the past kind of allowed you to realize this is actually what you want to do and this is what brings you happiness. And the only way to do
Yeah,
that is to experience and try and figure out, okay, what do you like and what don't you like? And eventually you'll end up in a happy place as well.
agree.
Cool. Awesome. I'm going to round it off here. Rosemary Lokhorst. I'm going to put all her socials in the description below. Check her out. Let her know you came from our show. And with that being said, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you very much.